Hi folks. After centuries of obscurity, the word cuckold has become popular, albeit in the shortened form cuck. Why? Why has a word once rarely seen outside of Shakespeare and Chaucer not only reappeared, but also thrust itself into online political discourse? And why now of all times? I have conflicting feelings about this word. I find the way that alt-right guys use it amusing because it exposes their insecurities and possibly their closeted kinks. At the same time, I like the way the left has facetiously taken to using it, calling weak liberals cucks and non-rich libertarians cucks for capitalism. I like to use the word myself for Democrats who declare defeat before a fight has even begun. However, I worry that calling someone like Ben Shapiro a cuck is very unfair to cucks. But I might have gotten ahead of myself. Despite the prevalence of this term online in the last few years, you might not know what a cuck is. Or you might just pretend you don't when it gets bandied about, lest anyone learn too much about your internet browsing history. For those who did not major in English literature and have managed to get through the last few years without learning its meaning, the word cuckold refers to a man whose wife or girlfriend sleeps with other men. Up until recently, it meant only that, but in the last few decades, it has come to mean a man who enjoys the fact that his wife sleeps with other men. This kink comes in varying degrees. Some guys enjoy the humiliation that comes with either watching or knowing their wife is having sex with other men, sometimes incorporating elements of BDSM into their relationship. Other guys simply take pleasure in seeing their wives enjoy themselves or hearing about it afterwards. These guys sometimes call themselves stags to differentiate themselves from cucks who get off on the humiliating acts associated with cuckolding. Some stags actually feel a sense of pride in knowing how much other men desire their partners. To round out the terminology, the women in these relationships are usually called hotwives, and the men they sleep with outside of their marriage are often called bulls. At this point, you might wonder if I'm some sort of cuck for knowing this much about the topic. No, I'm not a cuck.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
I mean, it's fine if that's who you are.
Absolutely.
Wanting to see your partner with another person is actually a very common fantasy. According to a study of thousands of people conducted by sex researcher Justin Lee Miller, 58% of men fantasize about cuckolding, and it is an incredibly popular search term both on Google and Pornhub, which means that, statistically speaking, most of the guys who throw the word around as an insult doth protest too much, methinks. In the interest of the argument of this video, and not being one of those guys, I will admit I understand why some people find the idea appealing, at least as a fantasy. While doing this in real life does not appeal to me, in the abstract it actually sounds pretty hot. I mean, if you find your wife attractive, it seems reasonable you would enjoy watching her in the throes of passion, or at least the idea of it. It's not a fantasy I thought about until I came across it in porn, but I get it. However, I have the same hang-ups as most men in our culture. Not to mention the logistics of making this happen seem like a lot of work. Regular dating sucks enough. I'm convinced that never having to date again is a big reason why people get married. But finding a guy who I would like enough that I would be okay with him sleeping with my wife seems like a really tall order. Like a lot of guys, I have enough trouble maintaining regular friendships with other men. We should not kink shame, especially since the evidence we have on the subject indicates that people don't choose their kinks. But of course, I still made a point of letting you know I'm not a cuck. So where does this insecurity about being a cuck come from, and what can it teach us not just about sexual relations, but broader political and socioeconomic issues? So far, when people have written about this topic, they have focused on the interracial element that often, but not always, accompanies this kink. A lot of cuck porn features black men having sex with white women, while their white husbands look pathetic in the corner. Given how the alt-right, who have an obsession with white birth rates, have latched onto cuck as a slur, this kink certainly reveals a lot about white male anxieties. I will get to this, but I think it just scratches the surface of what the popularity of cuckolding as a kink and a slur says about the state of men in the world today. The way people use cuck as an insult reminds me of the way that up until recently, they used the word gay to question someone's masculinity. It makes sense that cuck became a popular slur not long after it became unacceptable in all but the most regressive circles to insult someone by questioning their sexual orientation. In both cases, the slur has little to do with its actual denotation and has everything to do with what it suggests. When someone uses the word cuck, they rarely use it to mean that the person in question literally has an unfaithful wife. They use it in a more metaphorical sense to imply that the target is weak or a lesser man. Just as when I was younger and people still threw gay insults around, they rarely meant the person was literally homosexual. Calling someone gay always said way more about the insecurities of the person using it as an insult. The same goes for cuck. Perhaps more so because cucks enjoy the humiliation, which is why they have embraced the term. So if you call an actual cuck a cuck, you will probably humiliate him a bit, but this might arouse him as well. Sounds kinda gay, bruh. Now, of course, here I speak of guys who enjoy getting cucked, not guys who have partners that actually seek out pleasure elsewhere without their knowledge. The latter carries shame, whereas the former either feels no shame or actually revels in it. But again, why this insecurity, and why do some men get such pleasure from abandoning it or embracing it the way someone engages in self-deprecating humor? The answer to these questions can tell us a lot about the future of gender relations and the family. I think many men feel adrift in a changing economic and cultural landscape. For an increasing number of people, the old roles don't really fit anymore, and the new ones have not yet formed. Media theorist Marshall McLuhan often remarked that we drive into the future using only our rearview mirror. Try as we might to imagine a new setup, many of us can't see outside the nuclear families of Leave It to Beaver. It does not matter that many families have not looked like that for a long time, if they ever did. We still look to this model, and for many people in this stage of precarious late-stage capitalism, it simply does not work. I say this as someone for whom the model works pretty well. I live in the suburbs with my wife and 2 kids. I love my nuclear family, but I have to admit that the model has some flaws. In the US, there is little in terms of government services to support families, and due to the demands of capital, many people don't have the kinds of social networks that ease the burden of raising families either. People move away from family for jobs, and even if they don't, many potential elderly caregivers can't afford to retire and spend their time providing childcare to grandchildren. This puts a responsibility that was long shared amongst extended families on just 2 people. In order for it to even work for our family, it requires a major tweak which touches on the anxiety many men feel. My wife is the breadwinner, not me. I do most of the domestic work, and with whatever time I have left over, I write and make these YouTube videos. Placing this entire burden on 2 people working 2 full-time jobs has caused many nuclear families to fission apart into subatomic ones, as has the fact that lifelong monogamy simply does not work for everyone. The divorced dads, single moms, incels, and serial monogamists of all genders demonstrate that this one-size-fits-all model promoted by conservatives does not, in fact, fit all. As Gramsci wrote, "The old is dying, and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear." A variety of economic and social changes have caused this model to wane. Deindustrialization and the demise of unions have made the kind of jobs that once allowed men without a college degree to be a sole provider increasingly scarce. So many take on debt to finance their education without any greater job prospects or stability. Without a decent job, young men can't move out of their parents' house and start a family, or in most cases even get laid. Men find themselves playing by all the rules, but still losing because the game has changed. Even if they can win the game, so few households can get by on one income that the prized position once occupied by men no longer exists. Now, I don't want to play the world's smallest violin for heterosexual men. Many of the losses they have experienced are only in comparison to their former position in society. They have also benefited, along with everyone else, from a relaxation in sexual mores. But because of these same changes, the economic factors just mentioned, and the fact that women now have basic economic rights to property they were long denied, women simply don't need men like they used to. This has many guys feeling like they don't have a place. Historically speaking, a large group of disenfranchised young men has a lot of potential to cause trouble. This can happen even if the disenfranchisement is only relative or perceived. We see this with incels, the alt-right, and the men's rights movement. Young men without anything to do and without any sense of purpose are an incredibly dangerous thing to have in your society. This is one reason civilizations used to build pyramids and the like. It kept men busy, gave them something to do, that gave them some sense of accomplishment. It gave them a paycheck so they could provide for themselves and attract a mate, or at least afford to have a beer at the end of the day. All the worst elements in society seem to understand the potential of young men who lack some combination of prospects, hope, and direction. Islamic extremists and all manner of hate groups understand this very well. The military has always understood the untapped destructive power of young men. In any case, all of these manosphere groups have latched on to the concept of the cuck in one way or another. For the most fatalistic of the incels, the black-pilled, getting cuckolded represents the best-case scenario in a world full of bleak possibilities. Always seeing the glass as half empty, these guys think that even if they do find a woman, she will either lose interest in sex after having a few kids, or eventually step out on them with another guy. Given their cheery dispositions, they might be right. But given recent insights into human sexuality, this scenario actually has a grain of truth to it. More on this later. Cuckolding, especially the way it is portrayed in a lot of interracial porn, is a white supremacist's nightmare. A black man having sex with a white woman while her white husband watches, often with some additional humiliation added in, seems so specially tailored to raise the hackles of racists that I have a hard time imagining this scenario coming from anywhere but an alt-right brain. This goes especially for the cuckold porn theme of black supremacy and white wives having their lovers' black babies. This looks like white supremacy turned on its head, the so-called white genocide that racists fear. Only racists have this fixation with white birth rates, so I feel like they tell on themselves with these memes. At the same time, this fantasy expresses a deep sense of unearned privilege that parallels unearned economic and social privilege. The cuck has an attractive wife, even though he can't satisfy her the way her black lover can. Just as a privileged middle-class white man has not had to work as hard as a black man to get what he has. In addition, the practice of locking cucks in chastity cages that prevent not only sex but any kind of stimulation and even erection seems like a weird reflection of the castration black men once faced for looking at white women the wrong way. To be fair, the interracial aspect of this kink contains as much white guilt as it does objectification of black men. The acronym BBC, or Big Black Cock, gets used a lot to refer to these men as if that is all they are. But many men in the lifestyle don't seem to mind, at least to a point. Michael C. is the host of the Keys and Anklets podcast about the hotwife and cuckold lifestyle. Though he recognizes that as a black man he is a fetish to some couples, he also acknowledges there is more going on there, and seems to enjoy playing along. He says he can sense a lot of white guilt amongst many couples who engage in interracial play, and does not begrudge them for the desires our racialized society has imprinted on them. But other factors come into play as well. Some people just like the contrast of black skin with white. Other white couples see less risk of a wife running off with a black man than with a white one, which is problematic for other reasons. While many are indifferent to race when it comes to who they wish to have sex with. In any case, the way these reactionary men fearfully obsess over cuckoldry, as opposed to however you want to describe the way I'm obsessing over it, shows they have a view of gender relations that comes straight out of the Flintstones. No, not the Stone Age, which they get terribly wrong, but the actual 1960s cartoon. Flintstoneization is the name given to projecting present societal constructs onto the past. Most of the evolutionary psychology the right uses to make claims about human nature relies on this. They claim that our cave women ancestresses picked so-called alpha males for mates because they could provide food and protection for them and their children. This ignores the fact that everything we know about our hunter-gatherer ancestors suggests that they lived not in monogamous nuclear families competing against each other, but in non-monogamous extended families pooling their resources together. The idea right-wingers have of the natural order and how we evolved comes as close to reality as dinosaurs being domestic pets and birds being household appliances. Like the Flintstones, it is a projection of 1950s family structure onto the past. A fear of getting cucked follows very easily from this view of the world as a sexual competition where the alphas get the women and the betas jerk off in the corner if they are lucky. Never mind that the concept of alphas and betas comes from a study of wolves in captivity that researchers could not replicate with wild wolves, or that it has even less efficacy when talking about humans. In their book, Sex at Dawn, Christopher Ryan and Cecile Jetha strike what should be a fatal blow against this right-wing view from evolutionary psychology. They did this by studying archaeological data, existing hunter-gatherer societies, and our nearest primate relatives. I don't claim their view represents a consensus, nor do I completely accept it myself, but it seems increasingly popular and a lot closer to the mark than the reactionary view of human sexuality. I hesitate to fully subscribe to their view because elements of it seem as much a just so story as the right-wing view from evolutionary psychology. I also don't want to come off as the guy who just thinks everybody should be poly. But their work does the best job of explaining why some people struggle with monogamy and why some couples find cuckolding and hotwifing so appealing. According to Jetha and Ryan, a lot of sexual competition takes place on a microscopic level. Our cavewomen ancestresses were not as choosy as right-wingers want us to believe and probably had multiple partners. Some hunter-gatherer cultures even believe in something called partible paternity. This means in order for a woman to get pregnant, she must accumulate a lot of sperm, and this often means sleeping with lots of different men. So much of the genetic competition takes place not between individual males, but between their sperm inside a shared female partner. Biologists can point to all kinds of ways that sperm from different men fight, and even theorize that the human penis evolved to pull out competing sperm. Now, ask yourself about the last time you overheard a heterosexual couple having sex. Who made the most noise? The woman, right? Ryan and Jetha claim that this copulatory vocalization, as they call it, functioned to let other men in the area know a woman was having sex and might be ready for another round when she is done with her current lover. According to them, this scenario explains why men fire off and are finished having sex, while many women are just warming up at that point. Studies have shown that men react to the knowledge of their partner sleeping with another man by producing more sperm, testosterone, and getting more aroused. Sex researchers call this sperm competition, and it sheds a lot of light on why some people enjoy cuckolding and hotwifing, and it is not actually an Olympic sport. My interest in this subject started when I interviewed Douglas Lane of Zero Books. We finished our conversation by discussing how to deal with the problem of incels. He suggested we could address this problem by transitioning to what he called a matriarchal society, but we could more accurately describe as a polygynous society, where women have more than one husband. This would give more men greater access to sex and pair bonding, as well as come closer to the way humans evolved, at least according to Jetha and Ryan. But, as he pointed out, we would all be cucks. True, but we would all be bulls too. Or at least a good deal of us would. I hadn't read Sex at Dawn at this point, but I had heard about cultures like this before, and while it did not seem like an arrangement I would like, I found it fascinating that it seemed to work. This got me thinking about cuckolding and all kinds of consensual non-monogamy, the umbrella that swinging, cuckolding, hotwifing, polyamory, open relationships, and probably some other arrangements I'm leaving out all fall under. I wanted to understand not only why people like these lifestyles, but also how they related to economic and social changes. For this, I needed to do some research. I knew a little bit about cuckolding from porn sites, but I know how little regular porn looks like most people's sex lives. So I searched hotwife and cuck forums. But the level of anonymity on these message boards still meant that I read a lot of posts that seemed more like erotic fantasies than personal accounts. I could practically hear the guys typing these posts with one hand. Podcasts prove the best source for accurate information. People willing to commit their voices to audio seem more believable than those commenting anonymously on a message board. For this reason, the Keys and Anklets podcast became by far my best resource on this topic. The host not only has great interviewing skills, no doubt honed from years communicating in this lifestyle, but he also really shattered many of my conceptions about hotwifing and cuckolding. This might come from the fact that he is not only a bull, but also in a relationship where he is a stag. So he seems to understand both sides of the lifestyle. Far from talking about cucks in a derogatory manner, as I would have expected coming into this knowing about cuckolding mainly from porn, Michael C. has the utmost respect and gratitude for cuckold husbands in that lifestyle. He has made it clear that the lifestyle would not exist without them, and rather than calling them beta males, he acknowledges their strength. Most surprisingly, he talks about the love he sees between these couples and how privileged he feels that they let him witness and participate in it. Upon hearing this, I realized how little I previously understood about cuckolding and hotwiving. For this reason, I think of Michael C. as the anti-Jesse Lee Peterson. Rather than going around calling men beta in an attempt to feel superior, he gives great respect to the cucks that many people would ridicule. Another thing surprised me about this lifestyle. Although the media focuses on the cucks in these relationships, it is all about the hotwife. After all, she has 2 or more men giving her attention. Don't get me wrong. Hotwifing and cuckolding are usually the husband's idea, and they include many things that I don't think most women would request. But even when the fantasy veers into these areas, it still ostensibly centers around the woman's pleasure. I find it significant and a good sign that even when these men don't know what women actually want, they do have a desire to please them. As Wednesday Martin documents in her book, Untrue, new sex research shows that the common conception of women being less sexual than men does not hold up now that the field of sex research has more women publishing their findings. This is an instance where a female perspective has shed a lot of light on areas overlooked by male researchers. They have found that women are at least as sexual as men, but the dynamics of female desire are not as straightforward. Some of this research shows that women can have a harder time with monogamy than men. This has a lot of facets to it, but a few seem relevant to the middle-aged demographic that makes up a lot of the couples in the hotwifing and cuckolding world. Women's bodies change due to age and/or kids, often making them feel less desirable. In some cases, this affects their libido, as does having a child. Their husbands might regularly tell them they are beautiful, but they also know their husbands love them and would say this no matter what. So on some level, they don't fully believe it. In the hotwife lifestyle, a woman has men besides her husband complimenting her. This can make her feel sexy again if she has gotten used to seeing herself more as a mother and/or wife. On podcasts, I have repeatedly heard hotwives say their favorite thing about the lifestyle is the increased self-esteem and sense of desirability it gives them. We live in a society where married women are not supposed to get attention from men who are not their partner. In many cases, even complimenting a woman's looks can be unwelcome, both because women don't like dealing with unsolicited propositions from creeps, and because men feel possessive of their wives. But hotwifing gives women a way to get this kind of attention in a context where it is welcome. It gives her a way to be promiscuous and not have to deal with society's stigma against women having multiple sexual partners. A lot of societies that have a widespread practice of non-monogamy have an interesting characteristic. They seem like great environments for children to grow up in. One of the big takeaways from Sex at Dawn is that sex is not just for procreation or even pleasure, but also for creating social bonds. As a consequence of these greater bonds, many cultures that practice non-monogamy share child-rearing responsibilities as freely as they share partners. This not only distributes the burden and joy of children amongst more people, but also creates a dynamic where children feel welcome going in and out of any home in a village. This exact dynamic would not work in a large industrial society, but I can see ways the idea could translate. I recently read about a pregnant woman in a polyamorous relationship with 4 guys. They all plan to raise the child together, and I couldn't help but think, how nice. I certainly did not envy these guys for having to share her affection, but the idea of having so many people around to cook, clean, help with childcare, support the family, and maintain the home does have a certain appeal. If she wants a date night with one of her guys, she always has someone available to watch the kid. I don't think we fully understand the interconnection of the economy, family structures, and people's sex lives. I would like to see more attention paid to this, but it seems like a knot that will take some time to untangle. In her article and book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, Kristen Godsey points out that welfare states provided by socialist and social democratic countries give women greater freedom and therefore better sex lives. When women have their basic economic needs taken care of, they don't need to find a man to take care of them and can instead find a man who has other qualities they like. This also means that women have a real choice when it comes to if and when they want to have children. Knowing you and your child will have a basic standard of living and that you will get childcare assistance from the state means that you don't need to let economics determine if you have a child. Without this assurance, talk of reproductive choice seems a bit empty. With this assurance, a woman can have a child with or without the biological father's continued involvement and not have to worry about having the money or help she needs to raise the child. In either case, access to childcare lifts a burden off of women that gives them time and energy for other pursuits, including sex. This empowerment of women where they don't need to settle for a man to survive scares many men. In her book, Godsey states that some men in Eastern Bloc countries who experienced the shift to socialism complained that they could not impress women with money anymore, but instead had to be interesting and cultivate personalities. The horror. I think this transition gets at another change that causes anxiety. In many ways, the men worried about socialism or social democracy would actually have it better if we transition to some kind of socialism. Many of them would have more economic security and feel less alienated. But they don't think about what they would gain. They think about what they would lose, even if they don't have anything to lose in a system that no longer seems to have a place for them. Just as they fear getting cucked even if they don't have a wife in the first place, and a structural change might give them just as many chances to play the bull, if not more. While even those who had something material to lose would likely find themselves living in a better world where they felt less anxious about the gap between their wealth and others, and lived in a more vibrant, stable society. In thinking about this, I realized something. It is not so much that these guys fear getting cucked, though they probably fear that. What really terrifies them is that deep down, many of them know that they have it far worse than any cuck, any incel, divorced men's rights activist, or alt-right guy whose wife begrudgingly has sex with him, if at all, has far less intimacy in his life than even the most hardcore cuckold locked in a chastity cage. The level of communication that I see amongst people in the lifestyle shows a connection I could not imagine from the kind of tight-assed, rigid-thinking right-wingers who complain about cuckoldry. In all but the most extreme cases of guys locked in long-term chastity, these cucks probably get laid more too. So why do I find this interesting, besides the obvious titillating reasons? Humans started out as hunter-gatherers who shared resources and sexual partners. As we moved towards agricultural and then industrial economies, we moved away from sharing both wealth and partners, favoring private property and monogamy. It seems very possible that a move towards socialism would include a move towards less strictly monogamous arrangements. But just as industrial socialism will differ from the sharing of resources in hunter-gatherer societies, future non-monogamous forms will also differ. So I find it worth thinking about what these new forms will look like and the hang-ups and anxieties many of us have about them. Because I do see a parallel, and even an interconnection between people's reluctance to share their wealth and share their partners. I include myself in this. If you're a guy who has made it to the end of this video, I think you are probably pretty cool, but I don't want you fucking my wife. Thanks for watching, folks. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you really like what I do here, please support me on Patreon. Patrons at the Rebel tier and up get premium content where I discuss psychedelics, the occult, and other not safe for work stuff. I also have some tarot t-shirts for sale. They feature the major arcana of the Marseille deck, which I use in my videos. I'm Greg Belvedere. Remember, all generalizations are stupid, so never speak in absolutes. Rebel Base, out.